Good afternoon and welcome to this edition of Finweek Money Matters, the show that helps you manage your finances. I'm Nozi Pombanjwe and my co-host is Marc Ashton, editor of Finweek, and Finweek journalist Jessica Hubbard. And coming up on the show today, we take a look at behavioral finance and the possible reasons why South Africans overspend on alcohol. And with the budget speech coming up next week, we take a look at two different aspects of what may come out of it. We encourage you to call in with your investment and market-related questions. The number to dial is 011-384-0598. That's 011-384-0598. Remember that you can read more about these stories and many others in this week's edition of Finweek, which is on shelves from today. The magazine is also available digitally in English and Afrikaans via mysubs.co.za. So we're shaking things up a little bit this Friday, and we're going to start off by looking at our Finweek Trade of the Week. Now, Mark, the Finweek Trade of the Week, you have opted to go short on the Aussie. Now, help me understand. The Aussie hit another high, I think it was Wednesday this week, breaking through the 47,300 mark, and here you're saying we should go short.
Look, I mean, there are a couple of things to consider. One, this trade hasn't worked out all that well for me. I've kind of been trading it between in a range of about 2,000 points, and it's been successful at times, but often, and this week in particular, it's just run away. And they always say the trend is your friend when you start trading, so maybe it's not a great idea to be going against it. I do believe that the JSE as a whole is overvalued. I think there's just, pick a metric, it looks overvalued at the moment. You look at what's coming out of the results out of like the JD groups. You look at the announcement yesterday from Eskom that the electricity supplies is under pressure, and you think, geez, this doesn't add up to what you're seeing in the market at the moment. And I think there is a lot of this enthusiasm. I think a lot of people are trying to get ahead of any blowout that might happen in the rand, but at some point reality hits home, and you're seeing it in the financial results that are coming out. The JD Group's able, even some of the retailers are really starting to take strain. Truworths, I saw a stat today, I think between Truworths and JD Group, they've written off more than $100 million of debt, of consumer debt.
That's Truworths.
In between the two of them in the last 6 months. It's a significant amount of money. It says South African consumers under pressure. So yeah, I think going short the Aussie might be probably quite a risky thing, because obviously you're going against the trend. But yeah, in general, I like it.
In general, you like it. I'm going to change track for a second. I mean, it's difficult to have you at the desk and not ask your opinion of the Facebook WhatsApp deal that is currently under consideration. $19 billion. That's a lot of money to pay for WhatsApp, which from what I see, it's not really clear how they actually generate in revenue.
Sure, and I think this is the big issue around Facebook in general, is what is its business model? Is its model just to acquire things and almost churn the market, or is there actually an underlying fundamental business here? I don't believe the Facebook model, and the reason I don't, I actually use my mother to be able to give the example. She had a Facebook account hacked recently, and basically she lost everything that she had there. People can clone your accounts, and there's just become this increasing I haven't had Facebook for 6 months now, and you get used to it. It's not something that's essential to your life, and I think that you can already see a lot of the analyst queries around Facebook is what's happening with the youth. Why are youth abandoning the platform? You're not getting your younger.
But this is the argument that Facebook is suddenly not as cool as it was before, and WhatsApp is the answer to put back the cool factor into Facebook. And with 100 million users signing up daily, surely that must be an attractive acquisition.
Sure, but I mean, you can roll these numbers out now. There's a couple of different arguments to look at, but essentially you can roll out these big numbers and say, great, everybody's moving to the platform. But if you can look at like a Naspers Tencent owned WeChat, people are also moving there in very, very quickly. And it looks to me, what is the, if you're on Facebook, you can serve it. You can say, I want a dentist in Randburg who's 27 years old, and be able to serve the ad to it. Does WhatsApp have the same functionality? No, it's a platform where you're able to trade out, exchange free messages. Is it sustainable? I'm not so sure. So
short on the Aussie, and not so confident about Facebook buying WhatsApp, especially for that whopping big figure of $19 billion. That's Marc Ashton. Time now for us to see what trend we are going to be befriending or unfriending this week. And the trend for this week is the benefits and risks of the mobile organization. Now, my understanding, and perhaps come to you, Jessica, on this one, my understanding of the mobile organization is based on this idea that suddenly employees are working off their iPhones or smartphones, they're working off laptops, and it's a bring your own device scenario. What are the benefits first of having an organization that operates in this manner?
So bring your own device has actually been around for a while, but we're seeing it creeping into the local environment, and for the first time companies and managers are having to carefully consider what are the risks and what are the benefits. We're seeing among the benefits are an increase in productivity as employees are more comfortable with using their own devices. They know how to get around these certain firewalls, they're comfortable with the applications and the user interface, so they can do more. They also go home and then use those devices, so they're actually online more. So they're working harder. Among the risks though are where is the company data being stored and who has access to that data? Because the key here is that employees are using their own devices, but they're connected to the company network. And that is a gateway for malware and hacks to come in and for cyber espionage. So companies need to have policies in place from the very beginning. What applications are employees allowed to access? Who can access the company network when those employees leave? So I would say having a policy in place from the very beginning is a way to get around BYOD and to make sure that you're maximizing those benefits and getting around the risks.
Marc, let me get your views on this. It seems as if the trick here is trying to find a balance between the two, between the benefits and the risks in particular. Do we have any examples where this balance has been hit and hit really well, where the risks have really been succumbed for the benefits that it can bring?
Look, I mean, I think there are a couple of good examples within organisations where you've been able, where computer hacking. I mean, you can use Target for instance, and it's not exactly the same thing, but it's looking at the credit cards and how easy it was for a big organisation like Target, which has all these security policies in place, basically hacked and lost millions of credit card details over the credit and debit card details. So here's a concern that somebody's able to get into your network, and once they're on your network they can do anything. I mean it's a free-for-all, and I think that the opportunity is going to be in what are the security solutions that you can do there. There are a couple of JSE listed businesses that play in the security space. That might be an option if you believe that this is the way organizations are going, and a way to cash in on that trend.
So definitely Marc saying that there's an opportunity to cash in, so this is a trend that you would befriend for the companies that could make a buck out of it.
I think there's a win-win in terms of increased employee productivity. I think there's an opportunity in the IT security space. I'm just concerned about the security aspects from a business perspective. So befriend or
unfriend, Jessica?
I would say companies have no choice but to befriend this trend.
Companies have no choice but to befriend that trend. That's Jessica Hubbard, that's her view, and we're going to go with the ladies today because we're doing things a little bit differently, and Marc can just, I don't know, he can keep quiet for this particular session. Time now for us to take a quick ad break, but when we come back, more Finweek Money Matters. Don't go away. In its cover story this week, Finweek looks at behavioural finance and the possible reasons behind why South Africans spend almost 4 times more on alcohol than out-of-pocket healthcare, and about the same on DStv subscriptions as they do on retirement annuities. Are we just born this way? Joining us at the desk is Eric Vermeulen, behavioural economics strategist, and Nicola Klein, Deputy Dean at Gibbs. Thank you so much for making the time to join us. Before we get into the conversation, of course, Jessica, you were the brains behind this article that is in Finweek, and you spoke to a consulting firm 80/20 about their findings. What were the key findings, and what do they reveal about our spending patterns broadly?
So the 80/20 report came out last year, and a lot of people were upset about the different angles that they took and the findings and how they projected those numbers. But what I found most interesting is that those numbers reflected that people are irrational in how they spend. So the example that we listed in the article is that we spend, 4 times more on alcohol than on out-of-pocket healthcare, and the same amount on DStv subscriptions as on RAs, which sounds totally irrational. So I was looking at the drivers, because the 80/20 report gave us the numbers, but they didn't really delve into why we spend the way we do, and what are the key findings that we can take from reports such as these. Another finding that came out of a 22/7 blog was that South Africans spend 10 times more on their cars as they do on their savings, which I think if you hang around Parkhurst or Sandton, that doesn't really come as a surprise. So I was thinking, how can we answer this question? What is behind it? And behavioral economics is a field that is coming out very strongly in personal finance. We have a couple of personal finance pioneers, so to speak, in this country who are applying behavioral economics to try and help people, nudge people into making more rational decisions.
Well, we've got a behavioral economics strategist. That's a big title for one person, Eric, right here at the desk. I mean, let's talk about the rational versus irrational differentiation that Jessica talks about now. Do these statements that we spend 4 times more on alcohol than we do out-of-pocket healthcare resonate with you, and is that a true reflection of the ordinary South African?
Well, I think absolutely. Numbers never lie. And the whole interesting part about this whole science of behavioral economics is that we're looking to see what goes on behind the decision making. And as much as we think that people are rational, they're not. We make decisions for our own reasons, often for our own immediate reasons. The way we look at money from a psychological point of view is also very different from the way we look at money from a financial point of view. We've got, for example, different mental bank accounts. So you might say, you often hear people complain that they're short of cash and e-tolls and taxes and bond rates are going up, they haven't got money, but guaranteed they've still got money to go out for Friday evening dinner with the family and blow $500-600 on that. So what we do as human beings is we kind of proportion our finances into different mental bank accounts. So we complain about e-toll roads because our tax mental bank account is all but exhausted. But our entertainment mental bank account, heck, there's always money in there for us to go to the movies, go on holiday, take the trip, book the weekend away.
So I've got two questions jumped out at us around the office. So one is, what's the role of violence in South Africa? And the idea was, well, if you're almost living for the now at the moment. And the second one is obviously this optimism that's effectively described South Africa since basically 1994. Everything can only go better since 1994. What is the role there between, those are two things that immediately jump out. Is that something that's impacting how South Africans are thinking about their finances?
Eric, let me intervene and perhaps let me just get Nicola into this conversation. We'll bring it back to you, and perhaps Nicola, let's get you answering to this particular question.
Let me make a first point that I'm not a behavioral economist, I'm a marketer. And so our traditions have been a little different. A lot of the behavioral economics work has been experimentation and trying to find those results. I want to go back, though, to what is irrational. Because is it irrational to feel accepted in your society? Is it irrational to optimize what gives you value today? And so I think this notion of it's rational or irrational is sometimes a dangerous path.
That's something that
down
came
which
out
we
strongly when I spoke. I chatted to Simon Dingle and Christo Darvel, who are driving 22/7. Simon is a particularly passionate follower of behavioral economics, and he said you need to be careful in telling people how and where to spend their money, because different things are important to different people. And I love playing polo, which seems completely ridiculous to my family and friends, but it's my passion and I spend money on it. And for somebody else, classic cars, and that's what makes them happy. So you can't be too judgmental and harsh when telling, so you can't actually tell people how and where to spend their money, but you can guide them and sort of remind them of the future and how they can perhaps be a little bit more responsible on a day-to-day basis.
Nicola, you made a mention just as we sat down at the desk about the importance of status and brand consciousness. And perhaps what we're going to do, let's do this. Let's take a short break. And when we come back from the break, we have Nicola picking up on the question around consciousness and brand awareness and how that is perhaps a key driver. And then, of course, we have our behavioral economist strategist, if I get that title right, giving us more insight in terms of what actually drives the spending patterns of South Africans. Let's take a short ad break. More Finweek Money Matters right after this. Welcome back. You're watching Finweek Money Matters. We continue our discussion on behavioral finance with our guest Eric Vermeulen, behavioral economics strategist, and Nicola Klein, deputy dean at Gibbs. Before we went to break, I know you had a burning question for Eric. Let's just revisit that question and hear what Eric has to say on that.
So basically, my question was, in South African context, we know there's high levels of violent crime in South Africa. Which does that impact the way people approach their finances? Sort of, we live for today rather than think about what might happen down the line. And the second thing, the impact of 20 years of optimism since the 1994 elections, how is that guiding the principles of behavioural economics?
Yeah, well, no, I think the principles of behavioural economics guide that kind of behaviour. We know that behaviour is all about habit forming. So habits result from a cue that produce a behaviour to get to a result. So South African society has kind of figured out pretty quickly, and over the last 20 years, that certain behaviours get them certain results. Yeah. The only way to change behaviour is to get people to understand what the cue is, what the result is, and then how to achieve that same result through a different behaviour. So we've come to learn that celebrating success is sort of the South African way. Yep. You know, after the 1994 elections, there's lots to celebrate. Then we had the 95 Rugby World Cup. There's lots to celebrate. Every couple of years, there's something big for us to celebrate. So how do we celebrate? We celebrate by joining in with the masses and becoming just part of that crowd.
I'm not convinced it's all about celebration. I think that a lot of this is about finding identity. So we sit in a country where there's a lot of identity transition. If we look at the impact of apartheid, if we look at the political changes that have happened, what have we got? We've got a population who has systematically been deprived of opportunities to manifest their identity in many ways. One of the quickest ways to establish your identity in society and your social belonging, and a quick fix way, is conspicuous consumption and branding. Now, this is not something new. I mean, sociologists have remarked on it. And what it builds is not what we call financial capital. It builds social capital. So this notion that I'm irrational because I go and I buy a car that makes people look at me and admire me, I'm not sure that's irrational. If my desire is to appear successful in society today, I do think, though, that the violent, you mentioned violence, you mentioned optimism. I think we do have more of a today sort of focus on our consumption. And I'm fascinated, and I think the jury's still out around how things like culture drive it. We know the Japanese behave profoundly differently when it comes to savings behavior. So I think this is a really complex milieu that we find ourselves in.
But, and talking about culture is what I find striking is as South Africans, we battle to find our own unique cultural icons. So what we do is we attach a lot of value to American cultural icons, for example. Yeah. And I mean, everything is about branding, what you wear, what you do. People pick up their cues from what they see around them. As much as we want our own identity, we also want to belong.
Let me bring it back then to a financial angle from the culture of ownership in South Africa. So, for a big part of our history, a certain segment of the community hasn't been able to own businesses, hasn't been able to own property. It's only now starting to happen. And we talk. And an example would be, why do we not see a number of black entrepreneurs coming through? The question is, why don't we see black-owned businesses on the JSE? There's still not that culture that seems to be there. And it still takes time for that to formulate. I mean, is that a fair example of behavioural finance in South Africa from a South African perspective?
I think it's a fair example of saying that we haven't yet righted the imbalance. And so, to kind of achieve balance where there's been imbalance, you've got to go past a point and I think in a lot of ways we're still finding our feet. We're struggling with that identity and we're struggling to belong. And what we find from behavioral economics research is that people would do what people in their social environment do. So you put 1,000 people into a sports stadium to watch a game. They're going to sit quietly minding their own business. Put 50,000 people into a sports stadium. Suddenly everyone adopts similar behavior. In a very well-known research study, what the researchers did was they looked at how people embrace honesty and fudging, and do I cheat or don't I cheat?
Right.
And what they found was that if somebody who was an homogenous part of the group cheated, it gave everyone else in the group permission to cheat. So they cheated more than they did in a control group. But when someone with a different identity wearing the colours of the rival university across town, for example, cheated. Then all of a sudden everyone became more moralistic, and we cheated less.
I would have to say, though, that I think the search for identity and the way we spend on brands and irresponsible spending in this country is compounded by a lack of financial literacy at the basic level on how to manage your finances. And I think it does complicate the issue and worsen it. And I think that's where businesses and large corporates can come in and instill a degree of financial literacy at the grassroots level, because when those impulses kick in, at least people are aware of what they're doing.
I think Jessica, you're absolutely right. There's a role to play, but what we've got to be careful of is what are those cues? You spoke about the cues. What cues are we showing? Because to always go into these very rational, numeric, if we plug your numbers into XYZ spreadsheet and it comes out, people just tune out. And what I think we're not doing is we're not role modeling enough. I absolutely endorse what you're saying about the 80-20 data, but what's fascinating is we're finding pockets of consumers, low-income consumers, where saving is unbelievably ingrained, more with women than with men. We're not highlighting those success stories. So we're playing the branding angle and we're talking about the conspicuous consumption, but we've got to show another way of being.
And often they're informally saved in stokvels and things like that, and community savings mechanisms.
And we're also getting trapped in that. Who are the role models that we're looking at? Social media tells us that the role models are people who have high sort of media value.
And the conspicuous consumption.
Yes, yeah. Whereas, and exactly what we're saying now is the stokvels, there is that area of saving that is definitely picking up, but we're not seeing it.
Nicola, what do you think of some of the analysis that's come out, especially around this group that everybody likes to write about, the black diamonds, and how they are driven by certain cultural considerations to spend in a particular way? So I picked up a report that says it's actually got nothing to do with culture, and it's really just about an asset deficit. It's about what they don't have, and it's an accumulation of those particular assets that they think that they need in order to balance the scales so that their lives are more reflective of where they think they should be at a socio-economic level.
I think there's a myth around black diamonds. We've got to be very careful when we start talking about a group of black South Africans who have moved into middle-class spending patterns of assuming that everybody is rushing around engaging in conspicuous consumption. It's precisely because a smaller number of them are consuming so conspicuously that they grab our attention. So there's subgroups in society. I mean, isikotane is a fascinating phenomenon where people get together for conspicuous destruction, which in some ways we can argue is even more irrational. But to assume that all black middle-class
dousing
South
a fire
Africans
with a bottle of Johnny Walker Blue Label is a little bit irrational, and I've seen some videos of Skotanis doing that.
Yeah, deeply empowering. But I think there's been so much attention focused on black diamonds and building this mythology of the black diamond. We've got to be very careful. It's still also a surprisingly small segment of society in South Africa.
Eric, your views on the black diamonds and whether they are a homogenous group or not?
I think absolutely they are. And I think that their behavior is being driven by the way our uniquely South African society is providing them with choices. Choice architecture is a fascinating subdivision of behavioral economics. And how we give people choices, not we, but banks, society, how we provide those choices for people goes a very long way towards the kind of choices that they end up making. I mean, we know, for example, that in the US, companies who want to encourage their employees to save give them a default option as when they get salary increases to save a bigger percentage of that increase. The idea is that money you never get is money you never feel you lose when you then have to save it or invest it into a retirement vehicle.
So that puts a spotlight on the question, should the market be structured to protect us from our own folly and from our own worst instincts? Or do we just acknowledge that banks and financial systems and products are there to sell us something, and we need to take responsibility for how we react to those products and how they're framed?
Nicola, maybe you can respond to that, but also touch on the aspect of unsecured lending. I mean, when options become many and having to sit through the stern look of a banker who's not going to give you the loan, as against sending an SMS or responding to an SMS and getting the loan that way, what then happens?
Look, I'm firmly in the belief that business needs to behave responsibly. If business is going to be around for the long term, you can engage in unsecured lending. That's not to say that we shouldn't, and property rights are a major issue. So unsecured lending does give people a certain degree of financial freedom that they wouldn't have otherwise. But when business starts lending today, knowing that the chances are they're not going to get that back tomorrow, it's not just socially irresponsible, it's bad business. So there's an issue here of what is good business in this space. I'm very anti, though, the notion that we can turn around and say that we become a nanny state. I think that's dangerous. I think the concept of informing consumers, but also doing it in a way that inspires them to save. And we all have a role to play there. But we've also got to give consumers, as citizens, a sense of this is a country where they have a future. This is a country where we want to make an investment.
I like the phrase that you used in your interview, which was building a tomorrow-focused society. I mean, who is doing that? Who can you think of that does that so well that we could possibly emulate?
I think it's coming from two sides. I think you've got some businesses who are really invested in trying to build tomorrow, trying to communicate those messages. I mean, if I look, and we can point our fingers at bank, but if I look at First National Bank, for example, and in fact the First Rand Group, the messaging that is happening, that I'm seeing coming out, is very positive. At the same time, it comes from groups of consumers, and the way that we bring up our children, and the way that we engage in conversations around the dinner table, around the importance of investing in tomorrow. It's something we all have to do. We can't point finger and wait for government or business.
Final comment from you, Eric, especially in light of consumers being under pressure, the sluggishness of the economy. Where do you see South Africa going, and do you see us changing some of this negative behavior, or what will it take to do that?
Well, I think, as we've said, whether it's negative behavior or not is basically all in the eye of the beholder. I think what we definitely have to